Welcome, everyone, to TAMA Talks, brought to you by the Torrance Art Museum Advocates. I'm Janine Madden, current TAMA president, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Today's talk will feature work currently on view as part of WILD, a public art residency program developed collaboratively with Madrona Marsh, the City of Torrance, and the Torrance Art Museum, funded by TAMA and Friends of the Madrona Marsh. This residency program invites contemporary artists with an environmental focus to interact with the Madrona Marsh Preserve, its scientists, researchers, students, and the public for a period of 1 month, during which the resident artist will research, develop, and build a site-specific work of public art to be presented on the grounds around the preserve for an exhibiting period of 4 months. An integral part of the project is its non-institutional setting and environmental footprint. Distinguishing this project is the essential linkage between the preserve and the art. Today's discussion is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel with all of our previous TAMA Talks. You can get to it from our website, www.tamadvocates.com. Today's guest is artist Katie Shanks. Katie is a Los Angeles-based fiber artist. Since receiving their BFA in drawing and painting from Cal State University Long Beach in 2010, they have emphasized the cultivation of community and connection as a founding member of the art collectives Somewhere in LA, Level Ground, and Acceptable Risk Los Angeles, as well as taking part in artist-run initiatives and exchanges such as High Beams, BLA Connect, Nomad, and TAM Forum. Over the years, Shanks has enriched their practice, taking scenic byways through millinery, fashion, installation, and performance, embracing the multifaceted nature of the work, and always pursuing new mediums to best communicate feeling and convey meaning. Their work has long been inspired by the landscapes, natural and urban, that surround them in their vast and varied home state of California. Katie has been accepted into Tulane's MFA program in sculpture, and that's where she's coming to us from today. So congratulations on that. That's huge, Katie, and welcome. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we're really excited to hear a bit more about your installation, Warp and Weft. It's the inaugural collaboration with the Marsh. And so I am going to let you share your screen and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Janine. I'm so excited to be finally having this conversation. It's been long in the works, and I still just feel so delighted and honored to have been able to kind of close out my time in California with this, beautiful and meaningful space to connect with both, the community, with a new, both like beautifully encompassed like microcosm of natural and urban environment, and really get to see through a project that encompassed that entire body of work. And and we'll talk about and show some of the ways it pushed me into some new spaces, which is really exciting. But yeah, I feel so delighted to have gotten to get to know this little this little gem of an urban wild space that is the Madrona Marsh out there in Torrance. And as much time as I had spent down in the area, particularly having participated in TAM for I guess I get a lot of inaugural TAM moments because I was in the first forum cohort and got, the honor of being selected as the first wild residency artist. And the marsh is really just I think less than a mile from the museum. And it not to overuse the word, but it's a little wild having, being there, and it's like right across the street from the Del Amo shopping center, and the juxtaposition of, this big commercial center and gas stations and things, and then this little pocket of wilderness that's just been maintained and is so lovingly cared for by the volunteers and staff there at the marsh, is just a wonderful community resource as well. And so I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to really dig in and get to know it. Because I'll say it, each day that I was out in the marsh over the month-long period of the residency, I usually tried to kind of either start or end my day out there working with just a loop around the preserve, because really every day was different. And it had, you'd find something new every day that you went out in the space. And so developing that relationship with the land and with the people who are there and caring for it, and with the community who is coming to visit it, was really kind of the most important part of all of this, and something that I really delighted in.
Yeah, I definitely think that, compared to an artist's studio experience where you're inside, this was a magnificent opportunity to really be out there in nature while you were creating work about nature. So
yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And it's something that does very much, lend itself to my practice and the way that the modes that I have been working in for the past several years. Over the course of the pandemic in particular, I leaned very hard into kind of what I think my environmental work, what I call and think of as my shelter structure series. And it's all playing off of these ideas that, for me, at least particularly, nature is one of the places that I feel kind of safest and most secure. And I think particularly the arc of the pandemic highlighted those feelings for me, because it was something where in those early days in particular, when the usual connections of like family and people and community weren't ones that you could lean into in the same ways, because we needed to be distant from each other while we figured things out. Being out on the land in the landscape was something that gave me that like literal room to breathe. That even though we think of nature as generally being something that we as humans need a certain amount of protection from, like we think of needing like, oh, protection from the elements. There are ways though that the land and the landscape can offer, a more spirit or soul like protection in ways sometimes that the urban and built environment, I don't feel like it does. And so
yeah.
playing off of those, And then, and then the flip side of that, and something that I think is particularly highlighted by the space and the situation there at the marsh, frankly, sometimes, nature needs protecting from us.
Correct.
Like we are a pretty disruptive element in the greater scope of things. And, and Madrona Marsh exists because a dedicated group of individuals have put a lot of time and effort into sheltering it and, being able to develop that kind of mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship where we do conservation and preservative work in order to ensure that it continues to exist and isn't encroached upon and continues to be a vibrant natural space. And then that space is there and available for the community to learn from and interact with. And
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's a respect for the majesty of it to be nestled right there in Torrance is a somewhat industrial city. And so
pretty industrial.
it really
And
is.
I mean, and frankly, that area right there around the marsh, a lot of they even have a bit of a go through a little bit of the history, both of the region and of like this particular specific biosphere that you see in evidence across the preserve. And one of the biggest reasons Torrance is a city is that they found oil and they drilled for oil. And so like those sort of industrial impacts, which can tear apart a natural space, are foundational in the founding of this particular urban center. So
right. I think
things you have to grapple with.
right. And I think there are probably more people who are familiar with the refinery there than they are with the marsh and the preserve. We run into that with the Torrance Art Museum as well. Sometimes people really realize that right in their own city that there's an art museum.
Exactly.
So this is a wonderful collaboration between those two hidden gems, if you will, in the city of Torrance.
Yeah, and I definitely, a big part of this program as well was the fact that it was public facing. And so I had a lot of interaction and a lot of conversations with individuals coming in from the public. And I'll say then there was a certain amount of ambassadorship in that, as someone who was representing and kind of speaking to both institutions. And there was I definitely encountered sort of individuals from both sides too. Like there was a small overlap of people who were already in the know, in that center of the Venn diagram of like about TAM and about the marsh and like knew and loved both spaces. But there was a lot too of introducing, someone who knew about one to the other and vice versa. And that was really delightful, kind of getting to act as a bridge over the, between those little islands.
Yeah.
over these beautiful waters. So, but yeah, and jumping back a little to kind of the program and the process of everything, the image I have up on screen right now is one from my very first day out at the marsh. And Steve, who's the program director for the site, was kind enough to kind of take me around, give me give me and Hope, who is the outreach coordinator for TAM and really the champion of this program, a lovely tour, and answered all of our questions and posed a few of his own, but really kind of giving us a foundation and grounding in the space. And it was really delightful because for background on the Madrona Marsh a little bit, one of the things that makes it so special is it is the last remaining vernal marsh in the entirety of Southern California. And for reference, like a vernal marsh at that point means it's seasonal, vernal being spring. And so in the spring, the waters collect here in this space. And the thing that sort of separates it from some of the other wetland spaces that we have through the region is that it is a strictly freshwater marsh at that point. And so most of the other wetlands that you'll encounter, like out in Bolsa Chica and such, those are they're estuaries. And so it's brackish water mixed, it's the mixing of the seawater, the salt water from the Pacific with freshwater sources. And as that dilutes, and they're both incredibly, vibrant and important like bioregions that we have out here, but they offer some different things. And because this is strictly freshwater, it does offer a little bit different and homes and hosts, like different wildlife. They get a lot of sort of baby, they get a lot of nesting like avian parents here. And so like the marsh is a place that different, they have a lot of different birds that will come and migrate through the space and kind of spend their springs here, laying eggs, going and raising their young, which was delightful to get to witness and and even just seeing the change too, and the growth in the babies and their little broods over the course of a month was amazing. Like if you ever need serotonin, an entire flock of baby geese or the little ducklings, or actually my personal favorite were the baby coots, which I have unilaterally decided as tiny coots shall henceforth be known as cooties.
Cooties. Now remind me, when did you start? Was it March?
I started mid-April. And
okay.
so yeah, my residency period ran mid-April to mid-May. Okay. And during that time, I was out at the marsh 2 to 3 days a week working, and started kind of with the process we see here of just going out, getting to know the space, amassing a large library of, like my personally acquired like photographic material, finding the wildlife, finding the flora, finding the fauna, just, for me in my process, that's always the first step. Like the photographs, the imagery that I'm using is my own. And so I spend time getting to know the space and capturing it in its many different faces. And so it was fun to just getting out there with Steve. And you can see here on the right, there is a red-winged blackbird, which they have a few of out at the marsh. This particular one is a bit of a character. So the species can be a little aggressive, and they're like, oh, he thinks he is the big man on campus, though, and he just he just rules that roost. And so when we spotted him on that first day, Steve was like, you got to watch out for that one.
Yeah, quite literally ruling the roost. Very nice.
Mhm. And so I also kind of wanted to take this time while I was out there to, to explore and to play and to get to know, this type, like get to know the vernal marsh environment and like the wetland type environment a little bit more intimately at that point. Because I'll say most of my nature and landscape based work has definitely been more focused on kind of the California mountains and forests and deserts, and wetlands were not a space that I have spent so much time with. But it also felt very apropos to have this as a transition, as now have moved to Louisiana and I'm living in New Orleans, and I'm having to come to terms with the fact that I now live in a state that literally has no mountains.
Correct.
They're
Right.
like, even looking for hills is a bit questionable. Like, it is fairly flat
Yeah.
and
Yes.
at or below sea level. So,
Yeah.
but it has a very, a very rich and varied like wetland
Yes.
present.
Yes.
And yeah, and while I will say Madrona is definitely it definitely is no swamp or bayou,
Right.
but it
Right.
it felt really fun to get to know know that sort of space that is kind of ruled and dictated by land's relationship with water, in there back in California before making this big jump out here and having that be, the land I'm walking in, the waters I'm swimming in. But so yeah, one of the other things that I took some time and wanted to get to know and do was like learning about the particular like flora and fauna that are there in the space. And I did a couple trips out with Steve where we looked at and kind of talked through what is out on the preserve, and the sort of the things that are there naturally that are they do have a lot of emphasis on trying to keep what is kind of the California native, like what plant species are natural to this biome and environment. But we're in an urban space and there's been a lot of encroachment on all of that. And so one of the things that they do too is in generally like caring for the space is a certain amount of invasive species, like control and cut back type of thing. And so we went out, and these are actually all invasive species to the space. So something where I was doing a bit of sort of service work by removing the things that they don't want to be encouraging or cultivating, and then started to use them as my raw materials in
And
this.
And so did this, so for people who don't have a lot of background in weaving, is this where the title of the project came? And did you know that did you know the title of the project before you started?
Well, it's funny because I hope really kind of like glommed onto warp and weft.
Okay.
And I was like, I use it in my general sort of titling of the pieces.
I see.
By the
Okay.
photo, like the photo woven pieces, I call my wilderness warp and weft. And
Okay.
what that is because, yeah, as you were saying, for like the background and weaving, the warp and the weft are your threads,
Mhm.
and the warp are sort of your vertical, your like long verticals that define the, you know, the length of the project. And if you're working on any sort of traditional loom, those are the ones that you kind of like stretch and set up in order to establish your project. And then and you know, and so they're fairly like static and stay stretched. And then the weft is your back and forth. It's what you're weaving in and out, where you're establishing kind of your pattern and your design within that space. Is like, it is the piece that is woven through at that point. And so yeah, I've always used that traditional weaving terminology as I've moved in, you know, like moved into this, even as I'm working with non-traditional materials of these like papers and photographs and everything. And so this little playful experience, I had kind of a you know, a little lap loom that I literally warped on the bus on the way to the marsh one day. There was a bad accident, and I was like, well, I have time, and just kind of pulled it out and was sitting there on the bus, on the metro,
Yeah, and
tying my warp strings.
it's beautiful in its you know, obviously this piece is not going to last, and so it's
No,
like
it
an
well, and
ephemera,
it does,
right?
it does actually. It's funny, I have it hanging
Oh,
up in a window, just
okay.
the other side right
Oh,
here.
wow, wow.
But just it has just changed greatly
Sure. So it's
from
dried.
those moments. Yeah. And so like you know, it still
Oh
exists.
my
It's
goodness.
just the character of it has changed.
Sure. Wow.
So yeah, like and I think it's something, having done, you know, having done a lot of installation work and such, I, you know, in site specific pieces, like I'm not afraid of ephemera. Like,
Okay, good.
part of the beauty of a lot of these things is, you know, like life, like they are not permanent. And the only thing, you know, the only constant in any of it is change. And so learning to embrace and work with that change, instead of against it, or to try to, you know, stem that tide. But yeah, and so that was another way of kind of getting to really like know the space, know the materials. You can see some examples here too, like there's some wild radish in there. We were pulling out the chrysanthemums are particularly problematic, and there's a lot of that. There's some examples of an invasive mallow species that are in there. But yeah, and so that was a really great way of kind of like getting to know know the flora a little bit better, and to really like intimately work with it,
Right.
even if that piece did not end up becoming a part of my like final end. I feel like it still just informed my process and my relationship with the marsh at that point.
Absolutely. And
Um,
the idea that beauty can come from the supposedly unwanted, destructive forces in the preserve, that can
mhm.
now grace your beautiful window in Louisiana. So
Indeed. Um, and so the other big part, like I said, of this was that it was a very like public and forward facing, you know, role within the space. And I wanted to take advantage of and really work with and collaborate with the community as well, because this is something where, you know, we're encouraging folks to get to know this space that is available to them as a part of the community. And I wanted to be able to do, you know, do some things to involve them and to really make it so that this, you know, some of the things that were coming from this residency and this project like felt like their own. And so along with like doing my work and, you know, creating a new body of work in response to this space, I wanted to, you know, give something back in that way that would be able to stick with and stay with the community. And so to like how I ended up doing that was through the start, like a facilitation of two different weaving workshops. The photographs and final pictures included in this are primarily from the kids workshop, which was done as a part of the Madrona Marsh Nature Weekend, which was at the end of April. So about halfway through my process. But they had, you know, big programming all day out at the marsh, and I was there and working on my pieces for a bit. And we also did a workshop for kids. The group was probably about 4 to, you know, the kids were about 4 to 7, had a, you know, lovely group of 10, 12 of them who were there. And, you know, and I set them up with their own little photo looms that had been pre-prepared and some you know, construction paper strips. And we worked through the process of like a very basic plain weave. And you know, the theory on all of that, and how, you know, how our clothing is made, how, you know, how we structure and do all of this is creating that flexible surface through, you know, threads or strips that go over and under and over and under, and then you just alternate that. So where you went over first row, you go under on your second, and just back and forth. And so that's something that like this as a project too is really great for little ones, because you get, you know, you're working on fine motor skill, you're working on pattern recognition. There's just a lot going on while it's still being kind of like simple enough for even fairly young children to grasp and engage with.
Could they take it with them when they left?
They did. And so
Okay.
what I asked for at that point is anyone who was happy and comfortable with letting me just take photographs of their finished pieces. So they got to take those home when they left. I did hear from some of the Marsh staff too, like they were, you know, there were some of the littles were just like, look what I made. So, you know, I'm very excited about their little like nature placemats.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these 8 weavings are some of the ones that came out of that workshop that we were just looking at photographs from. And, you know, so each of the kids got to choose like their photograph that was the basis. And then, you know, they all had the same selection of kind of these brown and green and pale blue strips, but they decided at that point the order of them or how to alternate, you know, like they had agency in that creative process to be able to make it their own. And then we're generous enough to kind of share the results with me. So we have each of these weavings done by our very small community members. And then I took those into my own process and started to create digital patterns and repeats from those weavings. So each of these are sort of 4 reflected versions
Okay.
of one of those singular weaves. And so by doing this, you start to develop these much more robust patterns that you can play with.
It's almost like a kaleidoscope.
Mm-hmm. And so, and you go from that to this is actually sort of the finished community quilt that was created. So while I composed this finished piece, all of the weavings that are featured in it, that are a part of it, were done by community members. Like I didn't do any of the weavings that are in this piece.
Wonderful.
And so like you can see right along the edges and kind of on the interior, the strips that are done out of those, like these patterned pieces that are right here. And you can see them kind of in reflection and repeat in that space. And the very narrow kind of wave that run, like the tall strips of those narrow ones, are that same set of patterns, just at a smaller scale. And that's a lot of, once I start getting into these like larger finished compositions, that's a lot of what I'm doing is the juxtaposition and it's like the repetition, and how do you create pattern through shifting those in different ways, and doing things where you're playing with how much of the referential material is still readable, is still, and at a larger scale, you're able to pick out those elements much more clearly still. And so you can recognize, oh, the flowers, or oh, the path, and such. But once you start getting to things where it's repeated many times or at a much smaller scale, the natural landscape that's there is lending itself to the color palette and to the resulting pattern, but it becomes this formal element, and it's no longer, it becomes abstracted. It's no longer a like figure that one is recognizing within the space, but it still has kind of the DNA of that natural space that is informing
And so
all of this.
this was all digitally created.
Yes, so this was digitally created from the photographs that were taken of the finished weavings, which each of the participants were then able to like take home and keep and have.
And do you have a program that will kind of compile them, or did you have to?
I mean, I did this by like this composition I did,
Yes.
digitally by hand,
I get it. Sure.
in Adobe Illustrator.
Okay.
I kind of think of it as my digital quilting,
Yes.
because so in my personal, in how I've been processing a lot of the imagery made and created from this, this type of work, is to go and make those pattern lengths and then have them printed onto custom fabric, which I have then been quilting and manipulating sculpturally. So it's a very reflective and redactive process and all of that. But the timelines on this, there was no way I was going to be able to get that returned and do the cut and arrange and do the physical quilting. So it's something where I'm there's definitely been a lot of push and pull, give and take on what is possible, and you gotta bend and not break to the deadlines.
Right. It is extraordinary though, just visually. And there's such a formality to it. Perhaps it's all of the symmetry. But when you look at it, when you first showed it, it almost looked like a blueprint for a formal garden, like
See that.
The end piece is there, it's like a bird's eye view.
Yeah, because you've gone and yeah, it's like the structuring of
Yeah.
the otherwise like riotous nature. And I feel like my process tends to do a lot of that. I yo-yo in a lot of ways where like I like working very small and very meticulously and very detailed, and then I like big expansive gesture, expansive improvisational gestures. And the development and arc of my practice is definitely like a constant like ebb and flow between the two of those.
Wow, impressive. It's beautiful.
And this is unfortunately not the actual documentation. It is a mock-up of it, but what was done with that particular piece is it's been printed as a 6 by 15 foot banner, which sometime in the next month, hopefully, will actually get installed here, kind of as pictured on the side of the nature center out at the marsh. And that is actually going to be a permanent public installation piece there at the marsh going forward. And that was something that I felt was important, is that like the piece that stayed, I wanted to be that piece that came out of the community efforts, because that's something where it's like, this is theirs, like it's ours. And just wanting that to be something that got to live and got to continue to be there.
Will this be on vinyl?
Yes, it's on a heavy, or actually, yeah, that one is a weatherproofed kind of looser weave vinyl though, so that weather, like the air and things, can pass through it and impact less. Don't need to be making sails out on the side of the building.
Right.
So but yeah, and so that's sort of the iteration of what came from that. And then for the work that I personally developed for, over the course of the month for the series, I was doing these more complex kind of ripple twill weaves of the photographs. And so pictured here on the screen, you can see the two images that went into this single weaving. And so it's something where, the one here on the left with the bush sunflowers, I cut as my sort of like my warp right there. And then here on the right, you have your weft, and there you see the pattern interwoven through.
Wow. It's interesting because they maintain their own, particularly the flowers, they sort of stay the same, that you can recognize them in the finished product. And then the sky, how you didn't, how the weaving itself isn't just an in, out, that how you skipped over some and left pieces longer. And it's such a thoughtful, like cerebral work, when you're looking at it. I mean, it's
yeah, I will say in this process on that, I had found and chosen a particular sort of weaving draft. And so which is how in general, when weavers work, you can make a draft, which is sort of a sample, mapping almost of what the pattern for something will be. And so I'd found this beautiful, it's a variation on a twill, which is kind of those tends in a twill, and like a basic twill has sort of those diagonal movements.
Okay.
And we'll have like the longer skipped pieces. Actually, one of the most common woven fabrics that any of us have exposure to, denim, is typically done in a twill weave. And so those like diagonal lines running across your jeans are the product of the twill weave pattern in them. But yeah, so this kind of ripple pattern is a variation on that, where you change directions, and there's some, there's like some shifting back and forth to create create these sort of the heavier and lighter, touches throughout it. And so I decided that as a sort of reflection of these contemplations of intersection of land and water was a really beautiful vehicle to kind of explore all of this through. And then here, one of the other things that I started playing with and experimenting with a little bit is to go and do some of these pieces and specifically like maintain a particular figure within the space. And so this is actually, so an example, this is actually just a basic kind of 1-2 twill weave. So you can see it kind of stepping where there's a single and then two of the opposite. And then it has a sort of like diagonal sequential progression through. And so on this one, I took these two of the fiddle leaf fern and the path running through the central area of the marsh, combined those two images while maintaining kind of the figure of the unfurling fern through the center there.
But inverted.
I did. Which
stunning.
are always kind of one of those things, most of the like compositional decisions and often done in kind of like formal, thinking about those formal elements. I go back to my training as a painter and with color theory and things like that. And so when I'm, setting up and deciding how I want two images to interact, it's usually coming from a place of like, okay, well, what contrasts do I want to play with? Are we playing with value? Are we playing with hue? Are you playing with temperature? Do I want those to be like strong and punchy, or do I want to let them be a little bit more subtle through a space? And so like here, to maintain a fairly like strong differentiation, I did that, that flip. And so it's something, it's something where, that rusty red is then interacting, like has a slight orange undertone, which is a complementary contrast to, orange to blue. And so we have this blue gray from the sky up here, and those start to vibrate a little bit. Yes. And then similarly, at that point, the light blue with the white of the sky and clouds from that space, as it comes into this lower section where you have, so there it's playing a little bit more with like hue and temperature are the formal elements having the conversation. Whereas at the bottom, it shifts to a much more like value-based structure where the light blue and the white are very light in value, whereas the dark green, the dark and bright greens here surrounding the bottom of the fern are very, like dark and strong in contrast to that. And then you get this like subtler passage in that central space around it, where you have like the greens and browns of the meadow and the, you know, the greens of the tree that is backgrounding the fern. And I think that's one of the things that I still really delight in this process too, is that I can, you know, I can sit there and I look at and think about where I want some of those, you know, tensions to be, or how I want to particularly highlight aspects of these images. But at the same time, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like until I do it all. And it's sort, and like the process of it kind of gets revealed through the weaving. And like, yeah, I can, you know, I have enough base and training to be able to know some of what these things will do and how they will act as they relate to each other and interact. But there's something kind of magical in in not holding the reins so tight, in letting it come out instead of dictating exactly what something is going to be. So that's always just delightful.
Yeah, that reveal at the end.
And so this was something that, you know, a little bit of actually kind of seeing that process of what the weaving is and looks like. I, for the first time during this residency, started to play with documenting the process of the weaving. And so these are little stop motion, just GIFs on repeat, that were created at that point by photographing every step of the process. So each time I took a weft thread through, I would take another photograph, and then you put those into a sequential pattern and just move them around, and it reveals kind of this process of the weaving.
Great. Oh, wow.
And so too, actually one of the other kind of new experiments and exciting things that came out of this is having done and created a whole series of these stop motion videos. I actually figured out as well how to turn them into little augmented reality filters. And so they exist as kind of like a VR and, you know, an augmented reality. And they're out there at the marsh. There are little signs that you can scan with QR codes, and it pops up a little filter in you know, on your phone in Instagram that shows the weaving process of two of these images in one of those spaces that the photos were originally taken from. So like out in the marsh, you can then see and experience the process of that art creation, like reflected out in this physical space that inspired it.
Great.
And it's fun too, because at that point you have it up and can either like take pictures or like take a little video which captures what your phone is seeing in the environment as it is now, with this transparency of the weaving occurring.
Interesting. So the QR code is in the location where the original image was taken.
Mm-hmm.
I see. That's extraordinary.
So
And that's so
things were,
interesting because not that it's going to change, like, it won't change as much with the seasons in California as it does, say, here on the East Coast, but there'll obviously be some changes. And so that's,
no, well, and I'll say though, frankly, even the nature of this particular environment
yes.
is much more impacted by seasons.
Ah,
And I'll
okay.
say too, particularly this last winter that we had and coming off of that into the spring, even, just the day to day changed quite a bit. And over the course of the month, because we had such a heavy rain season this past winter, it's like California literally like pulled out of a historic drought in one winter. And which at that point meant that the marsh was much fuller than it has been in many years. And so it was very wet. There were whole sections kind of through the central area that are sometimes, that are often, there are paths through and to that are usually accessible, that were, there were tiny islands out in that space because the
Right.
waters were so high. But then even over the course of the month that I was there, it started to get warmer, the season was shifting, and because this environment is strictly fed by that seasonal accumulation of fresh water, the water starts to evaporate. And so that land starts to get revealed, and it dries out, and you have these like different, these different formations and paths that are available. And it reveals actually at that point like very rich and fertile land that has been like sitting there. There were spaces, there was a space that I think my first day out was definitely still like fully covered in water, fully covered in water, probably at least a foot too deep and like over this large area. That by one of the last days that I was out, had all but entirely evaporated. And but it was so delightful watching all of the families of geese were kind of out in the same space. And so you had your geese parents and the little goslings, and they were all just so busy feeding, because that land, that all of these small bugs and creatures that are their primary food source has then newly been revealed. And so they were just gorging at that buffet.
It's such a, again, it's there for everyone to go and experience. And the photographs that you've taken and just your experience there on the marsh, I think really is a wonderful, you used the word ambassador earlier, and I think it is so appropriate because it really is just a wonderful opportunity for people to, observe, and by allowing them to participate in your work, it was kind of a nice combination of the two.
Indeed. And then, yeah, and final results of this process and what came out of it, I have a few installation shots of the work as it is currently hanging in the Nature Center out at the marsh. And so these are all of the individual weavings that were created over the course of that kind of month and a half, because I had a little bit of wiggle room too between when the residency period officially ended, some time to wrap up and finish some work and get it ready to hang and display out in the space. And we opened on June 3rd, and the work is still up at the marsh through October at this point. So I highly recommend that anybody who's in the area get out, you know, go and see some art and some nature. Get a double dose.
Absolutely. And then will these images be returned to you at the completion of the project?
Yes, for the most part, they are available for sale.
Oh, fantastic.
But
Wow.
yeah, so if
Okay.
anybody falls in love with something, there are also a few that as sort of a thank you to the people who really supported and facilitated things for me. You know, a couple of the staff members at
Oh, nice.
the Marsh and the museum,
Oh,
I
great.
have told to
Great.
please pick their favorites
Oh, how kind. That's lovely.
and have that, because I really did. It was so, I felt so very cared for through all of this process,
Yeah,
and
hope is
just really
amazing.
wanted to.
I'm glad that you had the
He
opportunity.
really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
wonderful. Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, and you can see too, yes, I made, like, I was pretty prolific
No, it's
during this
great.
little period. So
And it's not like
so
a
yeah.
little tent.
It is. So this particular, that piece that is pictured there, was there for the opening, actually is not there anymore.
Ah,
It's a previous piece that I had done, but we were unfortunately had some printing delays. And
oh,
so the larger central piece that, so I'd shown the picture of the finished kind of community piece, like
yes.
digital quilt created from the community pieces. Similarly, I had done a piece derived from those weavings that you saw framed along sort of the gallery, like the gallery walls there inside the nature center. And so I had done another one, double-sided actually, of those that was printed on kind of a heavy duty, like vinyl tarp that I was intended to be in as a, you know, as an installation within this central space, but it didn't make it in time for the opening.
Okay.
So this existed for a time in the atrium space to kind of like hold that space until the final piece arrived and was able to be installed, which you can see here. And so this was actually literally the day before I moved to
Oh,
Louisiana.
my. Oh, wow. Okay.
And so yeah, I had packed up the moving truck the day before, and then spent the next day down at the marsh, creating this sort of web of support to bring this larger banner, like quilted banner piece together. And this is what currently exists as an installation within the atrium space there at the preserve.
And so this will come down in.
This will come down in October. And so when the next, when the next artist Dodd comes in, we will clear and make the space for him to be able to create and display his own work inspired by this gorgeous space.
And however, the expectation is the permanent banner you do expect to be printed and put up, hopefully before October, the end of October.
Yeah, it has been printed. It has been printed already. We're just
Good.
waiting on installation.
Okay.
That was something where they were there were some technical details that needed to be figured out for that exterior installation, and the requirements of what could and couldn't be done on the building. And then just frankly finding time that the TAM preppers could be available, could be taken from their other duties within the
Sure.
museum
Okay.
and show schedules there. So yeah, last I heard from Hope, that was something where they're hoping for early October
Okay,
for the
perfect.
installation
So
for that
visitors,
particular piece.
sure. So visitors may be able to see that while your work is still up, and if not, hopefully later in the fall,
Indeed.
as Dodd's work goes in, because that's also a 4 month.
Yes,
Okay.
he'll have the month of working there, on site, and to draw his inspiration and develop the project, and then 4 months on
Okay.
display in the nature center.
Good. Yeah, I've been holding off posting too much about his work so that you can bask in the glory of your
Oh, you're so sweet.
of your creation there. Because it
Yeah, it's
is
been.
monumental on so many levels. I'm so pleased that this became a reality.
Me too, like very much so. Yeah, it was most wonderful going away present. And it's still been yeah, it's been really wonderful too, knowing that that I got to kind of like close out my time there in California on that note, with this like deep work and dedication and focus. And then that it's gotten to exist far, frankly, again, it's been in California longer, California far longer than I was at that point. Like I finished it and then hopped in a car and drove across the country
So
and
now
have been starting a new chapter.
will you
So
return, do you think, to California?
I I don't know that I will be back permanently or
Okay.
necessarily anytime soon.
Oh, it really was
I
your magnum opus, as it were.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's something where I will, I'm still involved with several of the art collectives that I was a part of out in California.
Right.
And actually, I do know, frankly, that I will be back for sure for an extended period of time in 2025, after shortly after I graduate. I am curating a show down at Angels Gate Art
Oh
Center.
yeah, with
And
Jason. Right.
so yeah, and so I'll be down there with presenting fluid dynamics, which was a proposal that I put in. It's still kind of a little, again, a little strange and mind-blowing to be like, okay, so here's this proposal for a thing that will, if it gets accepted, and spoilers, it did,
Great. Great.
will happen after the, at that time, grad program that I had not yet moved across the country for would
Yeah.
be finished.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
so doing some long-term intentions and planning right
Good.
there.
And
Um,
is it nature-based as well?
it is to a degree. So I'm standing in that one strictly as role of curator, not as
Oh,
an
oh,
artist
oh, okay. Okay.
involved.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
tickling a different part of my brain right there.
Fantastic.
But the proposal puts into conversation kind of four different artists each. So a total of 8 artists,
Oh,
four
okay.
artists from the greater Los Angeles area, four artists from the greater New Orleans area.
Oh,
And all of them are speaking to the very different relationships that we in those two cities have with these fluids that dictate our life, like water and oil, and then also into more esoteric understandings of like fluidity in things like gender, or, you know, the flow of information, or of, you know, of migration of individuals and language and ideas. And so, yeah, I've got a really, really exciting group of people who are, you know, thinking and engaging deeply with those materials and with those concepts that I'm excited to bring together and share with everybody out there.
For those who are watching, this piece, Warp and Weft, yes, will be there through the 31st of October, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe mid-October. I'm not sure when Dodd's work goes in. But my understanding, if I recall correctly, is that Wild it will continue. I think they have artists selected through 2025 or 2026. 2 artists per calendar year that will, if I think that's right, that will be able to work and display their process. So it's a little bit different than exhibition, where people bring in their work and hang it up and it stays up and you really never get to interact with the artist. Artist in residency programs like this one, you actually get to go in and talk with the artist during the art making process, which is extraordinary. And the fact that you have those workshops, you know, amplifies that. So it's really a wonderful, wonderful collaboration. We're so thrilled to be able to be a part of it, and so happy you were able to join us today. I know you are catching up.
Me too.
So I don't want to keep you any longer, but I thank you very, very much for your time, and the information about your project is just, I'm so grateful.
Likewise, you know, and thank you for all of your understanding and flexibility through you know, through these moments and these big shifts and life changes. I really wanted to be able to give the time and energy and attention that this conversation deserved, and at least for me, it was worth the wait.
Well, good. Same here. Same here. I mean, again, I think anytime we have the opportunity to kind of get a behind the scenes look, even though much of your work was done kind of on the scene.
It's true.
Right?
Everything was on. Yeah.
But I think that the you know, when you talked about your professional, your educational background and how that played into many of the decisions that you had to make regarding composition and putting it together, and you know, all of that is some insight that you wouldn't necessarily get if
It's
you
true.
didn't have the
Like there are
opportunity.
some things that, like, those you know, conversations come out, but people are usually asking kind of more surface level technical
Right.
things of what
Right.
they can see. And, you know, those are the conversations happening in my head as I'm working on something.
Right. And I think to be privy to that, as it were, you know, either through a conversation like this, or even in the opportunity to talk with you while you're working at the on site. And I know that TAM has had, I think it's Studio Systems, and we'll be having that next year. Same opportunity where you get to go into the museum while artists are working, and talk with them. And I think for the most part, they are probably very willing to share with you some of their, you know, that creative insight into the work that they produce.
Indeed. Yeah. It's something where obviously, like, that sort of form and format isn't necessarily comfortable for everyone, because
Right.
some people really need that internal focus, shut out the
Right.
world, and they're able to be able to do it. But
Right. That's
if, you know, if you, like, with a more gregarious personality, or just the understanding that it's, you know, that you're a little on display. I always joke a little bit that it feels like being the animal in the zoo.
well,
But
again,
it's okay to feed the artists though.
There you go. Yes, and it's oftentimes encouraged. So, all right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you,
Appreciate your
Julie.
time very much.
Likewise, you have a